Hello learners, welcome back. This week we are going to discuss Block 3, Unit 1, that is on tribal status and development strategies. We have been discussing in part 1, 2 and 3. Today will be the last session of this topic, that is on institutional setup. So let us discuss detail regarding this topic. Why we need to study institutional setup? Because institutional setup is necessary to implement the constitutional rights and legal rights and implementing and monitoring of the development policies in tribal areas. At apex level, as you know, initially the overall responsibility to the development of the tribals was assigned to the Ministry of Home Affairs. In 1964, this responsibility was taken up by the new department, the Department of Social Security. Later, to provide an integrated thrust to the tribal development along with the development of the other weaker sections of the society, the Ministry of Welfare was set up on September 25, 1985, and later on it was renamed as Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in the year 1998. Therefore, the thrust for more focused attention to the integrated socio-economic development of tribals led to the emergence of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, which was separated from the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in October 1999. And it is the nodal ministry for overall policy, planning and coordination of programs for the development of scheduled tribes in India. When we see what are the main responsibility of this ministry, is mainly to support and supplement through financial assistance the efforts of other central ministries, the state governments and voluntary organizations, and to fill critical gaps taking into account the situation of scheduled tribes. Now, when we see the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, it has certain mandates. Let us look at what are the mandates. Firstly, the social security and social insurance to the scheduled tribes, then tribal welfare planning, project formulation, research, evaluation, statistics and training. Thirdly, to promote and development of voluntary efforts on tribal welfare, and also providing scholarship to scheduled tribes to students who belong to such tribes. Then finally, the development of scheduled tribes in all the spheres, and also development of scheduled areas and matter included in 5th and 6th schedules. And there was also a commission to report on administration of scheduled areas and welfare of the scheduled tribes. Lastly, implementation of the Protection of Civil Rights Act in the year 1955 and the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Act in the year 1989. Excluding administration of criminal justice with regard to offences as they relate to scheduled tribes. Then the needs and problems of tribals and solutions required were quite different from the scheduled tribes. The National Commission for Scheduled Tribes was separated from the National Commission for Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes on February 19, 2004 by amending Article 338 and inserting a new Article 338A in the Constitution through the Constitution Amendment Act 2003. The main duties of the Commission are to investigate and monitor all matters relating to the safeguards provided for the scheduled tribes and to evaluate the working of such safeguards and to inquire into specific complaints with respect to the deprivation of rights and safeguards of scheduled tribes. Now, when we see the beginning of the first 5-year plan, the Planning Commission, various committees and commissions and the Ministry of Tribal Affairs since its inception in 1999 have proposed and developed plans and policies from time to time in order to address the issues of the constitutional safeguards, acts and regulations relating to protection of the interests of tribals in forest and trade and etc. So, as a result, several institutions have evolved in the states for implementation of such schemes and programs. These are autonomous district councils, In the Northeast, integrated tribal development agencies, integrated tribal development programs, tribal development blocks and tribal research institutes. Now let us see the Jawaharlal Nehru's philosophy and vision which has shaped the tribal policy in the 1950s in India. So these 5 principles are: people should develop along the lines of their own genius, and we should try to encourage in every way their own traditional arts and culture, and the tribal rights in land and forest should be respected. We should try to train and build up a team of their own people to do the work of administration and development. Some technical personnel from outside will no doubt are needed, especially in the beginning, but we should avoid introducing too many outsiders into tribals. We should not over administer these areas or overwhelm them with a multiplicity of schemes. We should rather work through and not in rivalry to their own social and cultural institutions. We should judge results not by statistics or the amount of money spent, but by the quality of human character that is evolved. Now let us look at the various approaches to tribal development. There are mainly 5 approaches which have been employed so far in the welfare of tribals in India. The approaches are political approach, administrative approach, religious approach with special reference to missionary approach, voluntary agencies approach, anthropological approach. Now let us see in detail what are the other institutional arrangements. With the onset of 5-year plan after independence, a new era ushered in, particularly in the socio-economic development of the weaker sections. The Planning Commission laid down the objectives and strategies for tribal development from time to time. A review of the tribal development programs of the first 6 5-year plans show that tribal development programs in India have been marked by 2 broad approaches, namely community approach at block level and the integrated tribal development approach under the tribal subplan. So in order to understand the rationality behind the community approach to tribal development, we have to review it in the context of community development program envisaged during the 5-year plan. Under this program, a comprehensive approach aimed at balanced development of the entire country was adopted to encourage people's participation in development and cater to the needs of the smaller units. The original idea for setting up of tribal development blocks was to cater to the specific needs of the tribal areas, most of which fall in geographically isolated and hilly terrain with no development infrastructure. When we see the level of development among the tribals, it varies from community to community depending on the degree of isolation and the inaccessible nature of the areas. As the tribal areas needed special treatment, a few special multipurpose tribal development blocks were launched in 1954, covering a few blocks. The SMPT, that is the Special Multipurpose Tribal Development, was the first systematic effort for the development of tribal areas. 43 such blocks were opened in different states for the first time in 1956 to speed up the process of development in the areas of the largest tribal concentration. The administrative structure of these blocks was patterned after the CD blocks, that is the community development blocks, but additional allotments were made to these blocks by tribal welfare departments. In 1957, based on the Elwin report recommendations, the SMPT blocks were converted into tribal development blocks from 3rd plan onwards. In addition to these SMPT blocks converted into tribal development blocks, more tribal development blocks were also started to cover many tribal areas. By the end of 3rd 5-year plan, the program expanded, covering all the areas with more than 2/3 of tribal concentration. This approach continued during the 2nd 5-year plan. In the third plan, different strategy for tribal development was evolved by converting those community development blocks where the concentration of tribal population was 66% and above into tribal development blocks. By the end of the fourth 5-year plan, the number of tribal development blocks in the country rose to 504. The strategy of development through tribal development blocks had its limitations as well, as it failed to address the cause of the tribal population of the country living outside the tribal development blocks, which comprised more than 60% of the total tribal population. The tribal sub-plan strategy, this was developed for the first time in the fifth 5-year plan. The main components of tribal sub-plan strategy are integrated tribal development agencies, integrated tribal development projects, modified area development approach pockets, clusters, primitive tribal groups and dispersed tribal groups. Now let us see what are the national policy on tribal development which was developed in the year 2006. The strategy for implementing the policy includes reorienting institutional arrangements in the scheduled tribal areas, strengthening and revamping of the administrative machinery, developing a quantifiable tribal development index, linking devolution of funds to improvements in tribal development index so as to bring scheduled tribes and tribal areas at par with national level by 2020. Preparation of a separate tribal centric strategy for each sector, strengthening ITTPs, ITDAs, MADAs and clusters in tribal areas, introducing single line administration in the scheduled and the tribal areas, adopting area planning approach in the scheduled tribal areas, adopting tribal sub-plan strategy in letter and spirit, converging efforts and resources, devising an appropriate personnel policy to ensure the presence of government functionaries in far-flung tribal areas, supporting voluntary action in the service deficient far-flung areas, developing appropriate communication strategy to effectively reach the STs, encouraging academic, anthropological and policy research, putting in place an institutionalized system of monitoring and evaluation mechanism for concurrent feedback and link to outcomes, and finally empowerment of the community in terms of the provisions of the PESA Act to transfer resources and benefits directly to the Gram Sabhas. Now let us see what are the issues which are covered in the policy to achieve tribal development. They are alienation of tribal land, tribal forest interface, displacement, rehabilitation and resettlement, enhancement of human development index, health, hygiene, drinking water and sanitation, livelihood opportunities, migration, money lending and indebtedness, creation of critical infrastructure. Now let us see what are the creation of critical infrastructure. Steps have been taken to effectively use the provisions under Article 275(1) of the Constitution to be taken to bring the infrastructure in the scheduled and tribal areas on par with the rest of the country. This includes treating the problem as not merely a policing problem, conservation and development of primitive tribal groups, adoption of TSP strategy, empowerment of PESA Act 1996, gender equity, enlisting support of voluntary agencies, tribal culture and traditional knowledge, administration of tribal areas, personnel policy for tribal areas, strengthening of the regulatory and protective regime, scheduling and descheduling of tribes, research and training. The Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers, that is the Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006, the FRA provides for restitution of traditional forest rights to forest dwellers across India, including individual rights to cultivated land in forested landscapes and collective rights to control, manage and use forest and its resources as common property, It also stipulates the conditions for relocation of forest dwellers from critical wildlife habitations with their free informed consent and their rehabilitation in alternative land. The FRA is a fundamental reform that represents a critical juncture in the relationship between forest dwellers and the state. Now, when we see the basic system of laws which are governing tribal rights, this is still extremely unclear. It is therefore imperative to undertake a harmonization of laws, that is between central acts and local land laws, between forest and revenue records, and between court judgments and other laws. There is no integrative exercise which has been so far been undertaken to examine the relevance of different central laws to these fifth schedule areas and to harmonize them with the aim and objectives of PESA. So, there is no amount of legal provisioning or refinement of the planning process can lead to better compliance of legislations either in the protection of rights of the tribal people or development of the scheduled areas unless the administration at the cutting level edge which is trained and attuned towards the objectives of PESA. Each state therefore needs to constitute a group to look into strengthening of the administrative machinery in fifth schedule areas. So far we have discussed about the policy. Now let us see what is the present status of scheduled tribes. Various efforts made from the beginning of the planned era through various developmental plans, policies, special strategies and programs have registered a definite quantifiable improvement in the socio-economic status of the tribals. However, if you see the progress made by them could not bring them anywhere nearer to the mainstream society, as the gap in their socio-economic status continued to prevail, not only as a matter of prime concern but also as a task to accomplish during the 10th plan. So, in order to address the emerging problems of tribal society in India, we have adopted some common approach for all the tribal groups by clubbing them together. On the contrary, they exhibit a whole spectrum of human and cultural evolution from hunter, gatherer, fisher through shifting cultivation, pastoralism, marginal farming to agriculture based on irrigation. It is naive to think that they all have similar problems and same or similar development or welfare schemes will be useful to them all equally. Looking at the Indian Constitution, the SCs and the STs have debated separately in the Constituent Assembly, but they have been clubbed together during the adoption of different provisions of the Constitution. Due to this reason, the constitutional provisions have emerged as a major breakthrough for SCs but not with STs. So, the STs are lagging behind SCs in terms of development and different spheres. It has already been mentioned earlier that all tribal groups have not experienced similar problems and they are at different levels of economic development. The problems of the Munda, the Santal, the Bel, the Gond or the Meena are not the same as the problem of Birhor or Chenchu or Raji. The STs of Northeast India and Rajasthan are not the same socio-economic level as those of Jharkhand or Orissa or Chhattisgarh. So, providing reservation of seats in the legislatures and parliament may be beneficial to say for Santal, Munda, Oran and Ho, to give example from Jharkhand or Meena in Rajasthan, but it does not help much to other tribal groups of different states. The reservation in jobs, maybe say in the central government, has been useful to Meena, Naga and Kasi, but it's meaningless to hundreds of other tribes in the country. The existence of a scheme does not ensure its utility to all. On the other hand, those already ahead and less in need of these provisions do take maximum advantage to the detriment of their poorer tribal brethren. So, exploring the present status of tribals in different parts of the country, it can be argued that they do not represent similar statistics in the context of problems and the level of social, economic and political development. So now let us sum up what we have discussed in this unit. This unit, we began with the exploration of the tribal situation in India and then goes on to look at the different problems at the different corners of the country with special reference to STs. It also discussed about the different welfare measures during the colonial as well as independent period. This unit also suggests that we have failed to adopt a single approach of tribal development which can initiate the all-round development of tribals. And also we discussed the adoption of different tribal development strategies based on the diverse nature of the tribal society, which has influenced the tribal society in a positive way, which would have otherwise been lacking. And we also discussed the impact of such policies, which are definitely in a positive direction, but they are far away from the desirous results and they have a long way to go. So learners, hope you would have listened to the lecture carefully, and we will also see the present status of tribals on the other developmental parameters in the subsequent sessions. Thank you.